The spring air in Ann Arbor, Michigan, typically carried the sweet scent of cherry blossoms and freshly cut grass, a gentle, unassuming fragrance that had always felt like a promise of peace. For 42-year-old Mara Thorne, a woman whose life was built on meticulous order and quiet contemplation, these scents were part of the fabric of her well-tended world. I cherished my routines: morning coffee on the porch, a brisk walk through the neighborhood's tree-lined streets, and then settling into my home office, where my persistent and inquisitive nature served me well in my work as a freelance research consultant. My small, fenced yard was a sanctuary, and my newly acquired SUV, a gleaming silver behemoth, was meant to be the perfect extension of that tranquility, a reliable vehicle for errands and the occasional escape to the Michigan countryside. It was a 2018 model, practically new, purchased online after weeks of discerning research, promising a smooth, comfortable ride. I felt like I had finally found the perfect blend of practicality and understated luxury, but a foul, insidious presence had begun to seep into my life, clinging to the very thing I had hoped would bring me ease: my SUV. It had arrived with an odor, subtle at first, that I dismissed as new car smell mixed with a little residual something from the previous owner. I'd taken it for a full interior detail the very next day, spending a significant sum to have every crevice and surface scrubbed, steamed, and deodorized. The detailing shop promised it would be pristine, but within hours of bringing it home, the stench began to assert itself again. It was a putrid, acrid smell, a sickening combination of rotting organic matter and something chemically sharp, like ammonia. It clung to the upholstery, seeped from the air vents, and permeated every item I dared to leave in the car. Each time I opened the door, a wave of revulsion washed over me. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a violation, a persistent reminder that I had been deeply deceived, and it was quickly becoming a financial burden as I poured more money into trying to fix what seemed unfixable. My heart sank with each failed attempt, a knot of frustration tightening in my chest. What kind of deceit had I fallen victim to? My usually serene mornings were now punctuated by grimaces and dry heaves as I forced myself into the vehicle. I became obsessed, my inquisitive mind, usually focused on obscure historical data or market trends, now fixated on this vile mystery. I Googled unexplained car odors, persistent sour smell in SUV, how to remove putrid stench from car interior. The suggestions were endless and useless: air fresheners, baking soda, ozone treatments. I tried them all, turning my once gleaming interior into a chemist's lab of half-used sprays and packets, but the smell remained, a phantom limb of my bad purchase. The more I tried to eliminate it, the stronger, more mocking it seemed to become. It felt personal, though I knew that was irrational. This car, my new pride and joy, was slowly turning into a cage of reeking despair. I longed for the simple peace I once knew, the ability to get into my vehicle without a shudder of disgust. My neighbors, a kaleidoscope of retirees, young families, and a few university professors, typically kept to themselves. Our street was quiet, with well-manicured lawns and an unspoken code of mutual respect. But then there was Gary. Gary Henderson lived directly across the street, in a house that always looked a little too stark, too unwelcoming. His lawn, while mowed, lacked any warmth or character. He was a burly man, perhaps in his late 50s, with a perpetually sour expression and a penchant for wearing t-shirts emblazoned with slogans about American manufacturing and fossil fuels. I knew, from a brief, awkward introductory chat, that he worked at the Jeep plant in Toledo. He seemed harmless enough then, just a bit gruff. Now, however, I started to notice things. Small, almost imperceptible shifts in his demeanor when he saw me. A sneer that briefly flickered across his face when I backed my quiet electric SUV out of the driveway. He wasn't a fan of electric vehicles, that much was clear. He viewed them as an affront, a national disgrace, as I'd overheard him grumble once to another neighbor about someone else's plug-in hybrid. I remembered rolling my eyes then, but now, a chill began to trace its way up my spine. One crisp Tuesday morning, I walked out to my SUV to head to the grocery store, and my breath hitched. The passenger side tail light was smashed, a jagged spiderweb of red plastic. My heart pounded against my ribs. This wasn't just an accident, it was too deliberate. My persistent nature immediately kicked in. I circled the vehicle, my discerning eyes scanning for any other damage. A long, shallow scratch ran down the driver's side, as if someone had dragged a key along the paintwork. My hands clenched into fists. This was beyond the mysterious odor. This was malicious. This was personal. I spent the next hour examining security footage from my doorbell camera, a system I'd installed more for package delivery monitoring than for crime prevention. The footage wasn't perfect. The tail light damage appeared to have occurred just out of frame in the dead of night, and the keying was a blur. But then, a figure, dark and indistinct, hovered near my car for a moment just before the tail light incident. It was too blurry to identify with certainty, but the build, the posture, it reminded me of Gary. My mind, ever inquisitive, started connecting the dots. His disdain for my EV, the specific, targeted damage, the vague figure. It wasn't concrete proof, but it was enough to ignite a spark of suspicion that would soon become an inferno. The initial promise of peace I'd bought with my SUV had not only been broken by a foul smell, but now actively threatened by a malicious neighbor. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a very steep cliff, and the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. I knew, with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in my gut, that my quiet life was about to become anything but quiet. And as I stared at the damage, a new question formed. Was the car's putrid odor connected to Gary's vile acts, and if so, how? And just how far would he go? Subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily. The first few weeks after the tail light incident felt like I was living under a microscope, or perhaps, more accurately, under surveillance by my neighbor. Gary's subtle sneers escalated into direct, aggressive glares whenever our paths crossed. He'd pause his gardening, pretending to prune a bush, but his eyes would follow my every move with a venomous intensity that made my skin crawl. My attempts to be polite, a simple nod or a forced smile, were met with an almost physical wall of hostility. The broken tail light and the key marks on my beautiful SUV were constant, mocking reminders of his aggression, and the persistent, putrid odor inside the car was now a festering wound, a vile secret that only I could truly smell, making me feel isolated and increasingly paranoid. I'd spent another small fortune trying to fix the tail light and buff out the scratch, but the stench remained. Mechanics, detailers, even an odor removal specialist all shook their heads, mystified. It's like something soaked into the very fibers, ma'am, one had told me, bewildered. We've tried everything. It's almost organic, but with a chemical burn. His words echoed in my mind, adding another layer to the mystery. My persistent nature, however, refused to back down. Instead of retreating, I started documenting everything. I bought a second, more sophisticated security camera system, positioning cameras at every angle of my property that faced his, hoping to catch him in the act. I kept a detailed log, a thick spiral-bound notebook where I meticulously recorded every suspicious glance, every muttered insult, every incident, no matter how small. Date, time, description, my emotional state. It was a tedious, exhausting process, but my inquisitive mind demanded answers, and my discerning eye sought patterns. I needed proof. I needed to understand the source of this persistent, invisible violation of my sanctuary. The nuisances escalated. It wasn't just my car anymore. Mysterious trash bags would appear on my curb the day before collection, overflowing with Gary's discarded fast food containers and crumpled newspapers. His radio, usually set to a conservative talk show, would blast patriotic rock anthems at ear-splitting volumes, specifically when I was trying to work from home. He'd park his massive, gas-guzzling pickup truck, often idling for 10 minutes, perfectly positioned to block my view of the street, forcing me to edge out blindly when I pulled out of my driveway. These were small annoyances, easily dismissed by an outsider, but cumulatively they began to chip away at my peace, eroding my sanity. One sweltering afternoon, I found a flattened squirrel carcass precisely placed on my driveway, right behind my back tire. My stomach churned. This wasn't accidental. This was a message, crude and sickening. My persistence wavered for a moment, replaced by sheer disgust, but then a cold anger solidified in its place. He wanted to scare me to make me leave. But I had invested too much in this home, in this piece, to be driven out by a bully. My motivation, initially about a car's smell and a financial burden, broadened. It was now about defending my home, my peace of mind, and my very right to exist undisturbed. I decided to try official channels first. I called the Ann Arbor Police Department. The officer, a young man with tired eyes, listened patiently as I recounted the tale of the keying, the tail light, the trash, the loud music, and even the roadkill. He took notes, offered sympathetic nods, but his voice was flat. Miss Thorne, without clear, undeniable evidence, there's not much we can do. This sounds like a neighborly dispute, and unless there's direct threat or property damage we can prove, it's difficult. He advised me to keep documenting, to try to get clearer footage. He mentioned mediation, a homeowners association, anything but direct police intervention. I felt a familiar knot of frustration, a sense of helplessness. My inquiry into the car's lingering putrid odor was met with the same shrugs and polite dismissals from professionals. No one believed how truly awful it was, or how insidious its presence. There was no homeowners association for our street, so mediation was the next logical step. I sent Gary a registered letter proposing a neutral third party. The letter came back unopened, marked refused. His response was clear. He wasn't interested in resolving anything peacefully. His goal wasn't resolution, it was harassment. My frustration morphed into a simmering fury. How could someone be so brazen, so openly hostile? My discerning mind told me I was dealing with a very particular kind of person, one who believed himself above the rules, emboldened by a sense of self-righteousness. The financial burden mounted, not just for the car repairs, but the constant cleaning supplies for the interior, the extra detailing attempts, the enhanced security system, even the time I was losing from my work because of the constant distractions and anxiety. The putrid odor in my SUV remained, a constant, vile companion, its origin still a maddening mystery. I became an expert in car detailing, a frustrated chemist attempting to concoct the perfect odor neutralizer. I stripped the car's interior, pulled up the carpets, checked under the seats, even removed dashboard panels. Nothing. The smell was everywhere and nowhere, a cruel joke. It made me feel foolish, naive for trusting the online purchase. It made me feel violated, as if the car itself, a symbol of freedom, was now a trap. Then, one rainy afternoon, it happened. My discerning eye caught something odd on my security footage. It was blurry, distorted by the rain, but unmistakable. Gary, walking past my SUV, lingered for a moment. He was holding something, a dark, thin object, and he gave a quick, almost imperceptible flick of his wrist towards the lower grille of my car. There was no sound, just the motion and a faint, shimmering trail like water in the rain. He then quickly moved on, whistling nonchalantly. It was too fast, too subtle for an average person to notice. But my persistent nature had me watching the footage on a loop, zooming in, slowing it down frame by frame. He wasn't just keying my car or breaking my lights. He was doing something to it, something liquid, something foul. My mind raced. The putrid odor in my SUV. Organic, but with a chemical burn, the detailer had said. And Gary's obsession with my EV, his disdain. The sickening realization dawned on me, chilling me to the bone. He wasn't just damaging the exterior. He was poisoning the interior slowly, insidiously, forcing that horrific stench into my vehicle through the ventilation system, right through the air intake often located near the grille. It was a targeted, disgusting, and deeply personal attack. He was systematically making my car unlivable, creating a problem that no amount of professional cleaning could fix because the source was external and insidious. He was making me feel crazy, making me question my own sanity, and draining my bank account in the process. This wasn't just petty vandalism, it was a psychological assault, a continuous violation. I hit rock bottom that night. Lying in bed, the phantom smell of my car seeming to cling to my clothes, my hair, I felt an overwhelming wave of despair. I was trapped. The police wouldn't help, mediation failed, and my neighbor was clearly insane, enjoying my misery. He had succeeded in making my life a living hell. The thought of selling my house, of running away, crossed my mind. But then, a flash of something else, something cold and hard, sparked within me. My persistence, my inquisitive nature, and my discerning mind had led me to this horrifying truth. I was no longer an unknowing victim. I was an investigator, and I had uncovered the source of the evil. Now it was time to turn the tables. My motivation transformed from simply finding peace to exacting justice. I would no longer be a victim. The time for polite requests and formal complaints was over. It was time for a reckoning. It was time for Gary to experience what it felt like to be truly and utterly deceived, burdened, and trapped by a putrid, inescapable stench. Subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily. The dawn after my rock bottom revelation brought not despair, but a chilling clarity. My transformation was complete. The bewildered victim was gone, replaced by a woman consumed by a singular, unwavering resolve. Gary Henderson had taken my peace, poisoned my property, and tried to break my spirit. He had deceived me, creating a financial burden and a pervasive sense of disgust. Now it was my turn. My persistence, once channeled into futile attempts at cleaning, would now fuel a meticulous plan. My inquisitive nature, once focused on finding answers to his disgusting acts, would now probe for his vulnerabilities. My discerning mind, which had pieced together the puzzle of the mysterious odor, would now craft the perfect, undetectable retaliation. The goal was simple: to make Gary's most prized possession, his gas-guzzling Jeep Grand Cherokee, as utterly, irrevocably foul as he had made my SUV. I wanted him to feel the same pervasive, unfixable sense of violation, the same deep deception, the same financial drain, and the same maddening frustration that had plagued me for months. And I knew exactly how to do it, thanks to the very Reddit post I'd stumbled upon in my initial, desperate searches for odor solutions months ago, a post I'd dismissed as too outlandish then, but now seemed like divine inspiration. Dog turds liquefied with 90% vinegar. And the target, his radiator. The very heart of his vehicle's ventilation system. The beauty of it, as the Reddit post had revealed, was that the only way to truly get the smell out was to replace the entire radiator and flushing the entire system, a costly, labor-intensive repair that few mechanics would suspect was caused by a malicious act. It was genius in its simplicity and its devastating effectiveness. My planning began immediately, infused with a calm, almost surgical precision. First, the ingredients. I didn't own a dog, but Ann Arbor had several dog parks. A quick trip to one with a discreet plastic bag yielded a sufficient quantity of fresh, potent organic material. For the vinegar, 90% strength was key. Standard grocery store vinegar wouldn't cut it. A trip to a specialty cleaning supply store on the outskirts of town, where they sold concentrated industrial strength solvents, provided the perfect, potent acetic acid. I needed enough to truly saturate the target. Next, the delivery system. A super soaker. Not just any super soaker, but one with a good pump action and a long, narrow nozzle, capable of delivering a concentrated stream with force and accuracy. I found an oversized, brightly colored model at a toy store, feeling a perverse sense of irony as I purchased it. I tested it in my backyard with water, practicing my aim, ensuring I could hit a small target from a distance. The key was discretion and speed. The final and most crucial part of the plan was surveillance and timing. Gary's routine was predictable. He left for the Jeep plant every morning at exactly 6:45 a.m., and he usually parked his SUV in his driveway, angled perfectly for a clear shot at the grill. He was a creature of habit, which was both his strength and his fatal flaw. My security cameras, once my shield, now became my intelligence-gathering tools. I studied the patterns. When he was outside, when his house lights were on, when the street was deserted. The ideal window would be late at night, after his outdoor lights were off, and before the city started stirring in the early hours. I marked the date on my calendar. Next Tuesday, a night when heavy rain was forecast, providing natural cover and washing away any lingering residue. The chosen night arrived, dark and drizzly. I waited until after midnight. My heart beat a steady rhythm, not of fear, but of focused determination. Dressed in dark clothing, with gloves and a baseball cap pulled low, I moved quietly like a shadow. In my garage, I carefully mixed the foul concoction, the reeking dog waste, pulverized and strained through an old colander for consistency, then blended with the powerful vinegar. The smell was potent, even to me, but I knew its purpose. I filled the super soaker, its plastic reservoir sloshing ominously. I slipped out my back door, moving through the shadows of my backyard, then using a gap in the fence to access the alleyway behind my property. This route would ensure I avoided my own front cameras and any potential street-facing cameras from other neighbors. The rain was a fine mist, perfect. Gary's house was dark, his curtains drawn. His Jeep sat silently in the driveway, a hulking monument to his misplaced pride. My breath hitched for a moment as I approached, the silence of the night amplified by the pounding in my ears. This was it, the moment of reckoning. My hands, despite the gloves, felt the cold plastic of the super soaker. I raised the nozzle, aimed it precisely at the lower grill, where the radiator and air intake vents were located. With a deep breath, I pumped the handle once, twice, 3 times, sending a concentrated stream of the vile liquid directly into the Jeep's guts. The disgusting mixture splattered, clinging to the metallic surfaces, seeping into the fins of the radiator. I emptied the entire reservoir, ensuring every drop of the putrid brew found its mark, saturating the engine compartment, knowing the fans would soon distribute the smell deep into the car's ventilation system the moment he turned it on. It was done in less than 20 seconds. Swift, silent, undetectable. I retreated, retracing my steps, disposing of the super soaker and my clothes in a sealed bag far from my property. As I rinsed my hands thoroughly, a wave of profound satisfaction washed over me, chillingly cold but intensely gratifying. The putrid odor that had tormented me for months, that feeling of deception and financial burden, was now Gary's to bear. The next morning, I watched with an almost clinical detachment. Gary emerged, grumpy as ever, and climbed into his Jeep. He started the engine, and then he froze. His nose wrinkled, his brow furrowed. He sniffed, perplexed. He leaned closer to the air vents, sniffing again, a look of growing horror on his face. He rolled down the windows, probably thinking it was something outside, but the smell was already inside, deep within the system. Over the next few weeks, Gary's frustration became a public spectacle. He drove his Jeep to work with the windows perpetually down, even on cold mornings. He'd spend hours in his driveway, scrubbing the interior, hosing down the exterior, spraying air fresheners like a desperate man fighting an invisible enemy. I saw him talking to a mechanic in his driveway, gesturing wildly at the engine. I even heard snippets of their conversation: rotten eggs, dead animal, something stuck in the vents. Each failed attempt to eradicate the smell was a balm to my soul, a quiet symphony of vengeance. He, like me, was now pouring money into a problem that seemed unfixable. He, like me, was experiencing that maddening sense of deception, the feeling of being trapped by an insidious, putrid odor. He never figured it out, not truly. He suspected something, I could tell, but he couldn't prove anything. The smell was just there everywhere. Eventually, about 2 months after my decisive action, a for sale sign appeared in the window of his Jeep. It lingered for a while, then finally, one Saturday, a tow truck came and hauled it away. I later saw a similar Jeep in a lot a few miles away, discounted heavily. He'd sold it at a significant loss, desperate to be rid of the stench, just as I had been desperate to rid myself of mine. The peace, or what was left of it, began to return to my street. The loud music stopped, the trash disappeared, and Gary's glares, though still present, seemed hollower, defeated. About a month ago, I ran into him at a grocery store on the other side of town. He was pushing a cart laden with processed foods, looking older, more defeated than I remembered. Our eyes met across the produce aisle. For a split second, I saw recognition, then a flicker of something else, a dawning comprehension. I smiled, a perfectly innocent, slightly confused smile. Gary, is that you? Fancy meeting you here, I said, my voice light, casual. I was just wondering, whatever happened to your old Jeep? I haven't seen it around. He paled. His jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He knew. In that moment, he knew everything. The keyed car, the broken tail lights, the putrid, inexplicable odor that had ruined his vehicle and cost him a fortune. The look of realization behind his eyes was priceless, a masterpiece of dawning horror and impotent rage. It was the purest form of vindication I could have asked for, the grand payoff for months of torment. I didn't need to say a word. My role as the unknowing victim turned investigator, turned avenging angel, was complete. He had thought my EV was a national disgrace, but I had made his pride and joy a personal and very literal disgrace. My life has returned to its quiet rhythm. My SUV, blessedly free of any lingering foul odors now that Gary's proximity no longer threatened it, feels like a new car. The satisfaction of the outcome is deep, a profound sense of justice delivered. It was petty, yes. But sometimes, when dealing with a truly hellish neighbor, the only path to true peace is a little strategically deployed canine vinegar scented chaos. The tranquility is sweeter now, knowing the price that was paid for it. Subscribe to Neighbors from Hell channel for new Neighbors from Hell stories daily.